All right, we've already seen the general pattern that Darwin noticed with respect to oceanic islands. The species on oceanic islands are most similar to species on the nearest mainland, and he explained this by a process of migration and evolution, migration and change. Let's take a look at a specific example. If we consider the finches that live on the Galapagos Islands. Now, originally Darwin didn't know they were all finches. There's some 13 species of finches there, but he thought they were different species of birds. But later experts identified them as finches. Well, we can then compare the finches on the Galapagos Islands to finches in South America and North America. And we'll apply our reasoning. If the Galapagos finches had South American ancestors, and we compare the Galapagos finches to North and South American finches, then the Galapagos finches should be most similar to the South American finches. And sure enough, they are. So the finch species out here on the islands are most similar to South American finches and less similar to North American finches. And that would make sense if it was South American finches that were the ancestors that colonized the islands and then changed into new species. Of course, that raises a question. How do you go from one species of finch to 13 species of finches, right? Well, here is an evolutionary tree diagram capturing this idea. So here, down here, we would have the South American finch species, and then some individuals then colonize the islands, and that we're indicating that by the branching here in this tree diagram. The other finches stay in South America, and they would be today's South American finches. But those that made the journey out to the islands would have encountered the Galapagos Islands and food sources. There might have been plants that had already colonized the islands, etc. And so here, then, what this diagram is showing is that one founding species of finch is going to diversify over time into 13 different species of finches. Right? So the idea is that individuals, as they populated the islands, they began to move into different environments. There are different environments on the different islands, and on different islands you would have different selection pressures that would be shaping the populations in different ways. So natural selection would be different in the different environments. To understand that, let's go back to our sort of diagram showing variation. Here's our ancestral species with a certain type of beak. What Darwin noticed on the islands is the finch species had different kinds of beaks. Some are longer beaks, and those were good adaptations for getting small insects. Some had this kind of beak, good for cracking seeds. Some had the shorter beaks, and this was good for eating certain fruits on the islands. And so we have to remember that nature is always experimenting through the process of reproduction. It generates variation. And the variation in beak sizes then is going to be the raw material for the evolution of different kinds of beaks. In addition, we can just have the actual size of the beak can show variation as well, right? Larger beaks are better able to crack the larger seeds, right? And the smaller beaks are good for processing small seeds. So the idea then is that the original founding species here, as they populated the islands, there's always going to be new variation being produced through the reproduction process, and that variation can be in the form of the shape and size of the beaks. Now we have to add to the picture the idea of the founding species migrating out to the different habitats, to the different islands. And on the islands, there may be different food sources. So let's say Island A here has a lot of small insects. Island B has a lot of seeds. Island C has a lot of fruits. Now, this is a simplification, but it makes a point. So starting from this kind of base level of variation, and again, we're simplifying this, but the idea is if you have a variation in beak sizes here, and if all of these individuals are located or migrate to Island A, then some individuals are going to have an advantage over others, right? So the birds with the longer beaks are going to have the advantage because that's the best adaptation for getting small insects. The other types of beaks would not be as efficient, and so those individuals would have a disadvantage. So natural selection then would favor those variations that are best suited, best adapted to the food source. So the food source would be the selection pressure favoring a certain beak shape and penalizing individuals with different beak shapes. So on island A, you would imagine then natural selection would be favoring this type of beak. Even if originally there was this type of variation, natural selection will favor the longer beak, and in time the entire population will have this suitable adaptation. But if this same group of varied birds colonized island B, natural selection would operate differently. Here, maybe the middle beak has the advantage, right? And so those individuals are better equipped to deal with seeds than the other two types of beak shapes, and so natural selection will favor this middle type of beak. Over time, that trait will become more numerous in the population as these individuals survive better and have more babies. If this original population with variation migrated to island C, there would be yet a different pattern for natural selection. Here, the fruits are going to be selecting the beak shape in birds, and so the third individual down here with the short stubby beak might have the advantage, and that trait will spread in the population as they have more babies than the others. So you can then begin to see that starting from a founding species, as long as there's variation being produced through the reproduction process, as they colonize different islands, different selection pressures, whether it be insects or seeds or fruits, these different selection pressures are going to be favoring different variations on those different islands. Now, if these populations are separated for a long enough period of time, enough genetic changes will happen in these populations so that were they to ever reunite on the same island, they might not breed with each other. At that point, we'd say they are a separate species. So from Darwin's point of view, then, this can help us understand how one species can branch into multiple species, in this case 3. Starting from one species, it's the variation that is the fuel for this process. On different islands, the different beak shapes are selected, and over time those populations evolve a species-unique beak to the point where we would identify these different finch species as separate species.